Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Kathy, the organizer for today's webinar. I hope you're ready for an interesting session. We've got a great one planned for you all today, and I'm super excited for you to hear from our speakers. For those of you who may not know us, Rosenfield and Co is a CPA firm. Automotive is our specialty, and we pride ourselves on helping dealers navigate not just the numbers, but the day-to-day challenges. Today, we are tackling a topic that's usually hiding in the background, cybersecurity. It's one of those things that doesn't seem urgent until it is. So we're really excited to pull back the curtain a little and talk about what dealers really need to be curious about. We've got a great lineup. Erik Nachbahr from Helion Technologies and our very own Greg Weber. And to keep the conversation flowing, we've got Alysha Webb as our moderator. And just one quick reminder before we get started, we'd love for you all to be part of today's discussion. The Q&A chat feature will be open the entire session, so please feel free to drop your questions at any time. And with that, I'll pass it on to Alysha.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, I'm sure that many of y'all have heard Erik speak at an event or listen in on one of his webinars because Helion does a lot of them. But I think that he's still going to have talk about some things that maybe you haven't even thought about before today. And I'm really happy that Greg is going to be able to bring the Rosenfield and Co. Point of view into the conversation. And as Kathy noted, you can always ask questions. If no one asks questions at the end, I'll ask questions, but I'm really hoping that participants participate with questions. So without further ado, I am turning it over to Erik and Greg.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. If you want to go to the first slide. I'm not seeing the slide change.
I have it.
Okay. Are we on example one?
Yes, we are.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
we are.
All right. So it's an interesting time. I've been having a lot of conversations with folks, a year, well, we're a little bit past a year on from the CDK attack, which of course we probably all want to forget. It's kind of like COVID, right? Once it's over, move on with your life. And I recently talked to Automotive News, and they were asking, what's going on in the industry? What are dealers thinking? What's changed? What hasn't changed? And the reality is that cyber attacks, cyber criminals are not slowing down. They're speeding up. And not much has changed. I'll talk a little bit about what I'm seeing out there in dealerships. And just to give you a little bit of background on me, we work with auto dealers and support about 35,000 dealership employees. So around 30,000 computers in those dealerships, to give you a little sense of the scale, in 38 states right now. So we see a lot. We're continuously looking at what's happening with our clients, but then we're also continuously talking to dealers out in the world about what they have going on and kind of what their challenges are. So a few things we're seeing. Interesting one, and interesting is not good in my world. This cyber attack that occurred in a dealer group, it got publicized a few months ago, but they were in the system apparently for 8 months. These are the same hacker group that attacked CDK successfully, and they were successful with this dealer group. And just to be clear, a lot of times folks think about hackers as, some kid in a hoodie right in their basement. Not, you see those pictures and not very threatening. What you have to understand is that cyber criminals operate in Eastern Europe and Asia. They operate pretty much out in the open as businesses. They've got call centers, software developers, security experts, data center infrastructure. They're very, very sophisticated. The they're estimating that in 2025 the cybercrime industry, because it is an industry, is going to be over $10 trillion. So you're talking about, in terms of, if it were the world's, we judged it in terms of size of economies, right? You've got the U.S. and then China, and then the European Union, and then cybercrime, right? So, and if you split up the EU and just Germany, cybercrime would actually be third, not fourth. So it's a huge, huge industry with vast resources, right? So going after everyone from, your mom on Facebook to organizations like CDK. So historically, we think of like nation state on nation state cybercrime. These are attackers that are focused on the industry. And I was talking to another cybersecurity expert that also has some clients in the auto industry, and he was wondering, and we don't have any data on this, did the cyber crime world kind of get an insight that, hey, there's a lot of money in the car business based on that CDK attack, right? I certainly thought about it when I was in automotive news, constantly quoted, like, well, I don't really want my name and company name in automotive news, right? Is this a good thing, or am I, signaling myself to these attackers? So with this attack, they were able to get into the system in very typical fashion. They were in the system for an extended period of time before they launched their attack. They were able to steal customer data. So interestingly, they didn't hold them ransom. They stole a bunch of customer data, almost 12,000 records, and then made it public, right? They tried to ransom that. And so now that dealer group, of course, they were in the news. If you search them, you'll see their name, and they are now subject to a class action lawsuit. And interestingly, the class action cites that the dealer, right, because this is one of these weird things, right? You're a victim, and they're going to blame you for, basically being a victim of a crime. But what's interesting is they are, alleging that the dealer did not follow industry standard best practices to protect their consumer data. I don't know if that's true or not in this case, but I can tell you as a whole, if you look at dealers' preparedness when it comes to cybercrime, there's a lot that still needs to be done, and I'm going to talk about those things. So let's go to the next slide. So another incident that we saw and that we were pulled into to assist with was a compromise where the CFO's email box was compromised. This was another recent one. So CFO was tricked into clicking a link. The link was, via email. So depending on what stats you believe, 97% of successful cyber attacks are launched via phishing campaigns. So he clicked on an email, gave up his Microsoft username, password, and then his multi-factor code, right? So they tricked him into all of those things. And then they were able to sign in to his account. They saw that they were switching payroll providers. They actually stood up a domain name that was one letter off from the payroll provider. They set up email rules so that they weren't seeing the emails from the actual provider, emailed back and forth, created a bunch of urgency that a payroll had to get sent. He didn't voice verify, so he made a mistake, but that's the kind of stuff they're counting on and trying to trick you into, right? And changed the wire information without voice verifying and wired $400,000 to the cyber attackers. So money's gone, right? Really successful attack. And I'm going to talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication as well as we get into some further slides. But a good example of, he had some safeguards in place, didn't use them. So we'll go to the next slide. Another interesting thing with cybersecurity, right? And we've seen this for years. You get these checklists from insurers, and the checklists, are, do you have this? Do you have that? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Right. And we've seen over and over again when we assess dealerships and we say, show us your last cybersecurity, questionnaire. And that questionnaire, you make a bunch of representations. Well, and this was not a dealer, but there was a business that had a claim, they got attacked, they had a claim, it was legit. And the insurance agency then went in, and we've seen this numerous times, right? You file a claim, the insurer will come in and they send in experts. So we've been involved in kind of these after the fact, assessments and remediations with dealers that have had, big cybersecurity attacks where you go in and do the cleanup and assess what happened. Well, insurers send in their own assessors. Are they there to help? Probably not. They're there to look to see if they can deny the claim, right? I mean, you know how that goes, right? When it's sunny, they'll give you an umbrella and they'll pull it away when it's raining. So, and what they typically find is that things that were represented on these insurance questionnaires are then not in place, right? And they will say tricky things like, do you have X on 100% of your computers, right? Nobody has X on 100% of their computers, right? Even in terms of protection. So in this case, they found that while they had represented that they had multi-factor authentication, it wasn't fully implemented. So people were bypassed. There were accounts that didn't have it turned on, right? So then it wasn't working as claimed. And then they showed that the business failed to safeguard the data and then denied coverage. So a huge risk area in dealerships, right? Because what we find is that folks that fill out these checklists typically don't know the answers or haven't verified the answers, right? So let's go to the next slide. Why is this happening? Okay, why is this happening in automotive? Well, we see some different things that we've seen really for as long as cyber criminals have been involved in dealerships. So I've been working with dealers for 28 years. I started when I was 12. So, what do we see? Well, first of all, dealerships are very reactive when it comes to their defenses, right? So things happen, and interestingly, this is typically when we get pulled in, right? An attack has occurred, and then they're looking for what do we need to do, right? I mean, the horse is already out of the barn at that point. So, but that's very typical. And I mean, I think that's just human nature. But I think specifically in automotive space, we've seen that this is the kind of thing that it doesn't drive revenue, it doesn't drive gross, it doesn't drive service revenue, right? It's an expense. And that's how it's historically been viewed, but therefore it's reactive. There's a lot of false confidence in dealerships. And the two most typical things that I hear when we're talking to dealers is, okay, who's doing your cybersecurity? How are you protected? I got a guy. Okay. And the guy, and I'm sorry if I offend anybody, if you're on the call and you're the guy, is that guy is the person that, maybe got the DMS set up years ago, maybe helped the dealer at their house. It's the CFO, the controller, the dealer's son, the former parts manager, a former salesperson, the marketing director, the BDC manager, right? It's anyone in the dealership is that guy. And if they're kind of speak fluently about IT, then they're the guy, right? The other piece that we hear continuously is when it comes to security measures, I've got this handled, I've got a compliance company, right? As if compliance equals security measures being in place, and they're not the same. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So there's a lot of false confidence there about what dealers have in place. And there's a lot of pushback. Interestingly, if you look at the FTC safeguards rule that talked about all of the different things that businesses need to put in place to protect consumer data, right? Half of the comments, roughly, speaking out against FTC when they had their request for comment period came from NADA, saying all kinds of things about why this wasn't necessary. And then the third thing we have, which kind of falls into the same piece, right, with who's running things, is this lack of expertise, right? So there's just a general lack of expertise in the world when it comes to IT security. But in the dealer space specifically, what we see is the security tends to be put on IT folks that may be good at operations, but don't have expertise in dealing with cybersecurity threats. So we'll go to the next slide. The other piece that we find, and that kind of goes hand in hand with what I just talked about, is this siloed approach to cybersecurity. And there's really three pieces. And when you listen to these three pieces, ask yourself, how are you doing these three things, right? So the first is IT support. And that's historically what we know well, right? It's fixing computers, it's installing telephones, it's dealing with the printer, it may be getting manufacturers to integrate, right? So that's the day-to-day operational support. That typically has a security component to it, right? We're going to install software to monitor for malicious things. We're going to install patches. We're going to lock things down. So those are all things that fall under IT support. Cybersecurity is a very different animal, right? Cybersecurity is all about the expertise of keeping up with what are cyber criminals doing? How do they attack systems? How do we, protect and monitor and know if they're in the system and assess what they're trying to do, right? So that notion of threat hunting and then getting them out of the system and reassessing. So cybersecurity is a completely different discipline from IT support. And then the last piece is compliance, right? So, and just to be clear, when I talk about compliance, I'm not talking about a checklist that you're taking and answering questions of, do you have, multi-factor authentication? Do you have password change policies, right? So that is understanding what you need to be doing. Compliance is actual verification of what you have, right? So if I'm going to do OSHA compliance, I'm going to go look in your shop. I'm not going to ask you if you're OSHA compliant, right? So compliance is about verification. So the challenge is that all three of those pieces are either getting done or not getting done in dealerships, right? To varying degrees and with varying expertise, but they're typically completely separate from one another, and that causes a huge issue, right? Because they're fragmented, and then they don't work collaboratively. We'll go to the next slide. So, what do we see, right? And I'll give you some examples of things we see based on that fragmentation. So, the first thing when we look at cybersecurity is this mix and match collection of tools without a plan. And that typically happens because IT people are trying to help, right? And so they put some cybersecurity tools in place, or they buy some products, or they buy some services, or they pay for a little bit of consulting time. I'll give you an example. A lot of folks I've talked to out in the industry say, we're good on cybersecurity. We have SentinelOne. SentinelOne is a product that is used by cybersecurity experts to threat hunt. So it's hooked into all of your IT systems, and experts use that to seek out signs of cyber attackers and then stop them. That product used to be only available to experts. They decided to sell it on the open market so anyone can buy it. But it's like buying a set of mechanics tools, right? Just because I have a set of mechanics tools doesn't actually make me a car mechanic, right? The tools are essential, but it's the expertise in using the tools that makes you secure, right? And so that's what we see buying of products without the expertise behind them. And that gives a very dangerous sense of false security. You've got all of these different disparate systems, right? Firewalls, monitoring, antivirus, that also are very fragmented, right? So a firewall product from one company, monitoring that may or may not tie into it, right? Antivirus that's not hooked into anything, XDR that's not hooked into anything. So we see a lot of different technologies, and frequently dealers buy technology that we'll see isn't even implemented, right? So ultimately, there's no single cybersecurity strategy. It's more one of buying products. And those products frequently, if they're not deployed correctly, if they don't have the expertise behind them, add very little value. So dealers are frustrated, right? Because, hey, I've spent all this money and then I'm not actually secure. We had a client, a new client come to us, and they had a cyber attack, and they brought in a company that said, we're going to help you out and we're going to protect you. And they sold them firewalls, just firewalls. We're going to put new firewalls in right on the perimeter, and that's going to protect you. They're real fancy. Well, whether or not that was a solution that even should have been part of the answer, it was just one piece of the puzzle, and they got halfway through, and then the dealer's network had issues, and they threw them out. But That's the kind of stuff we're seeing of, hey, buy a firewall and you'll be good. Buy this box and plug it into your network and we'll be good. Buy these different tools and maybe don't install them. So this fragmentation is hugely problematic. Go to the next slide. So multi-factor authentication, and we're all familiar with that, right? So that's a combination of something you have, something you know, and something you are. So two of those things. So we're familiar with that, where you either get a PIN code or you get a text with a code after you type your password. Well, multi-factor authentication, if you think back to that example I gave of the CFO that was tricked into giving up his multi-factor authentication information, multi-factor is like anything, right? Because this is an arms race. Is now vulnerable, right? So that was kind of the greatest thing ever, and nobody can get past multi-factor. There's a couple of ways that multi-factor can be pretty easily thwarted, right? One, you trick somebody into putting that in. These codes are valid for a brief amount of time, so you trick them, you get the code, you log in, right? Another thing that's possible is even after people are logged on with multi-factor authentication, more sophisticated attackers can actually get a hold of their session. So that session is already authenticated, and then they can take control of the session and gain access to the information. So having multi-factor alone is not enough, but that's kind of touted as, oh, if you've got that, you don't have to worry about anything else, right? And I've had dealers say, well, none of our information is at the dealership. It's all online with my provider, and we've got multi-factor authentication. That is absolutely not enough to protect you alone. The other challenge we see, not just the limitation of multi-factor and tricking people, is that multi-factor isn't fully implemented. So when our compliance side of our operations started looking at, what are organizations doing with multi-factor, we found that users were bypassed, or that new hires were set up on the system with a default password. And one of the first things that you have to do after you log in is change your password and register for multi-factor. Well, in dealerships, one of the challenges you get is someone will get set up, they don't show up on the first day, or they show up on the first day and it doesn't work out, and then they never signed into their account, and then that account is still there. Dealers have challenges with stale or orphaned accounts, we call them in our world, and that's a vulnerability where they then aren't protected by multi-factor. So device-based versus application-based. A lot of times we see reliance only on device-based multi-factor. So you're familiar with that on your iPhone, where it looks at your face, or you give it a PIN code and it gets you access in, and then you have all the applications run. Where application-based would be you log into your bank and it prompts you again for multi-factor. In a perfect world, you're running both. Everything that has consumer data or banking data needs to have application-based multi-factor. Where we're seeing that device-based multi-factor is useful on PCs is for employees that are handling financial information and human resources, because those are both sets of folks in the dealership that will, and you can tell them not to, and you can try everything you want, but they will download personally identifiable information to their computers, right? Because they're running reports, they're looking at things that then download that data locally onto their machine and make it vulnerable. So that's where machine-based, device-based multi-factor authentication is a good add-on to application-based multi-factor authentication. Hopefully I'm not getting too geeky for everybody, but we got to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of this stuff so you can ask questions and be curious about what do you have at your dealership, right? I'm not going to get super into federated identity management, but let me suffice it to say that the auto industry, we're way behind the rest of the world. But the idea there is that you can have one user account, typically Microsoft 365, that federates security to other applications. So for example, our clients that have CDK federate to Microsoft 365. So rather than having another multi-factor token and another key and another sign-on, they can use their Microsoft 365 sign-on and token to log into CDK. So you'd say, well, I want to have them separate and I have more security that way. No, more user accounts, more complexity reduces security, right? You want to simplify. Security by obscurity is not security. Simplification allows you to control things much more clearly. Let's go to the next slide. So patching. right? Patching is this process of updating applications with security updates, right? So cyber criminals are continuously looking at vulnerabilities in software and in operating systems, right? If you look at any patch that comes out for Windows or Mac or your iPhone, you'll see they typically cite fixing security issues, right? When you look at, for example, when Windows XP went end of life and Microsoft stopped patching it, it got hacked within a couple of months. So these left without patches and security fixes to fix vulnerabilities that cyber attackers have identified, you're going to be vulnerable. And what we see in dealerships are patching is not prioritized and it's not done. Patching is not tested and they're not properly implemented. Why? Well, this goes back to, and this has been around for years and years and years, where, back in the day, you install the latest version of Adobe PDF, and now all of a sudden you can't open manufacturer statements, right? Or you install some other patch, and now, of course, it's Saturday morning, and the sales tower can't work deals because some update happened, and now they can't log into the bank, right, and pull credit. So there's this historical feeling of patches could take me down. That's not wrong, but patching needs to happen. And we typically see in dealerships, when we look at their systems, that patching is way, 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 way far behind. So that's something that requires a deliberate process to be in place. And it's something that needs to be looked at and asked about. You can ask for, and you should be able to see, if you're patching on your system, the technology that does patching, whichever one you're using, will show you a report of what your patch compliance is, right? So if you're not above 90% or worse, if you can't see a report like that, right? If I say, show me my patching report and there isn't one available, that's a sign of a problem there. And that's one of those low-hanging fruits that if you look at defense in depth and all of the different things you can do to protect yourself, that's one that really is low-hanging fruit, right? If you're not patching it, you're very vulnerable to cyber attackers. Let's go to the next one. Privileged accounts. So the number one thing that cyber criminals want to get is privileged account access, right? So that's administrative account. Once you have the administrative account, you've got the keys to the kingdom, right? So the first thing cyber criminals want to do is they want to gain administrative access. If you look at all these big attacks that have occurred, odds are, and a lot of times, like CDK was pretty tight-lipped about the specifics of the attack, which I understand, but odds are, and I don't know this, but odds are, based on the scale of what was the cyber attackers were able to accomplish, they probably gained administrative credentials, right? They got privileged access on some system that then they were able to completely shut down or hold hostage. When we assess dealership systems, on average, we find 15 domain admin accounts just on the computer network alone, let alone in the DMS and other systems, right? The challenge is, too, is when you look at who has administrative access beyond IT, it's typically C-level people, people whose names are on the building, right? So people that are very visible that you'd like to compromise, and those folks have admin rights. What we also see is that folks will have administrative access and will be logged in all day long doing their day-to-day operations with their administrative access, not just a separate admin account where they log in with multi-factor authentication only when they need it. They'll be in as admin all of the time. The other thing we see very frequently in dealerships is local administrator on PCs, and also domain administrators that are in the local groups on PCs. Local users that are domain admins. So all these different practices around administrator that typically are done for installing software or software that doesn't run without admin. And then you've got this huge challenge that nobody looks at, nobody sees. The other thing we see with admin is the passwords frequently don't change because people don't want to forget the password or be prompted all the time. This is a huge, huge problem in dealerships. Next slide. Obsolete equipment, right? I'm going to run this thing until it dies. I've heard that for 28 years in dealerships. And look, I get the notion behind it, which is we are going to extract the maximum life out of everything that we have. And I absolutely agree with that. That is a good business practice, right? Why would we replace it if it isn't broken? The thing that I would challenge you to consider is that with PCs and network infrastructure, it's broken when the manufacturers no longer support it. And, I've had conversations with dealers and dealer executives where we lament together this notion of planned obsolescence, right? Wouldn't it be great if I could say to you, after 7 years, your car is no longer serviceable and you have to buy a new one, or the wheels are going to come off and you're going to crash off the road, right? That's just not the way the world works. But in the computer world, that is the way it works, right? So, for example, next month, Microsoft is going to obsolesce Windows 10. No more patching, no more support. And Cisco, all of these different providers do the same thing, where at a certain point, the software has to be replaced, and it's typically software driven, right? And there's good arguments for replacing certain things like Wi-Fi, that you want faster processors, PCs need better processors. But ultimately, what we find in dealerships, and we see this everywhere, are vast amounts of equipment. Network infrastructure, right? If you open the closet that's got all the blinky lights and it's stuffed with wires that look like spaghetti and it's got garbage in there and computers from 20 years ago and adding machines, right? And everything else. I've seen everything in those things. The stuff in that closet is probably end of life. There are probably computers that are end of life, and that is a treasure trove for cyber attackers. And again, you go back to this notion of, are you doing everything you need to be doing to protect yourself? That's one that we find dealers are very typically victim to, right? They have tons and tons of obsolete equipment. Next slide. So this is one that we've seen over the years, and there's actually been more of this in the last couple of years when FTC did their updates. So there's this notion in IT security of scanning and testing, which makes sense, right? It's just like anything else. What do I have? Let's verify, let's test. And so there are a couple of types of testing that you can do on your computer system that are very vulnerable, very valuable. Computer systems are vulnerable, the testing is valuable. So the first one is called a vulnerability scan. A vulnerability scan is an automated scan that goes out on the computer network and looks for devices that don't have the latest software. So when we talked about patching, right, things that don't have the latest software, they're vulnerable. That's what vulnerability scans, generally speaking, look for, right? It's an automated scan. It attaches to computers, and network devices, everything, and it tells you, hey, this is the current version of software it's running. This is what it should be. Those things generate huge reports with tons and tons of data. The second type of test is what's called a pen test or penetration test. What that is a testing performed by human assessors. And say that again because it's very important. Testing performed by human assessors. So what those assessors typically do is they, again, run tools on the network, very different tools from what a vulnerability scan does. Those are tools that do things like scan a server and look for things like a web server running, right? Web server that's running a web application. So an example, we did a pen test is we found a web server running, and then the tool will say, hey, let me try a bunch of passwords. Well, we found a web server running. We tried admin, it let us in. Then a human needs to go and say, okay, what is actually there on this admin? I mean, one day it's going to be AI, right? This will all be replaced by AI. But for now, a person goes, looks, and says, what's on here? And we found a CRM. And we talked to the client that we were doing this pen testing for, and we said, hey, what is this? Oh, that's an old CRM. We haven't used that for 10 years, shut it off. But it had customer data in it, right? It had PII. So a pen test is a very interactive process by experts. Where's the challenge? Okay, there's two challenges. First of all, dealers are being told that they're getting a penetration test, and it's just a vulnerability scan. If you've been given a box to plug into your network and it's running automated scans, it may very well be scanning for vulnerabilities. It is not a pen test. It can't be. You have to have human assessors. Okay, so that's one problem. But the bigger problem is that whatever's happening, the results are not getting analyzed or actioned, right? So what we see very frequently when we talk to dealers out in the industry, say, I got this handled. I got a guy, I got a company, they do compliance, they got a box, it does a scan, we're covered, we've done all this stuff. And they think that because some scan was run and they got some report that's filed somewhere, right, that they're good, we're covered, we did our scans. Well, you know, if you look at what FTC says, businesses must develop, implement, and maintain a comprehensive information security program to protect consumer data, right? Scans alone, even a pen test alone, is not an information security program. That's the start of it, right? You actually have to have action items based on the vulnerability scans and the pen test of things you're going to go correct, right? Saying, here's my vulnerability scan that's 1,000 pages long. It's going to come up with things like your thermostat is on the wrong software version. That doesn't matter. What matters is you've got a server running on your network that's running Windows 2008, which we just did a vulnerability testing for a prospective client, and they were running servers that were from 2008, right? So these are the things that matter, and dealers, again, have a false sense of security because they think these scans are happening. But if you don't have an action list that comes out of those scans that you can understand, so this shouldn't be some magical thing, right? Here are the 10 or 15 items that are really critical that we need to address, because that's typically what it is, that are going to enhance our network security. And the minute you run these scans and tests, they're already old and not valid, right? Because you got to run them again every so often. Typically, best practices say vulnerability scans twice a year, pen tests once a year. You can certainly do them more frequently, but that's the minimum. Move on to the next one. I'm going to harp on this, one more time, because this does make me crazy. This notion of compliance software to be compliant, right? So what we've seen when FTC, updated their safeguard rules a couple years ago, is that everyone was kind of quick to adopt these compliance offerings. And what the compliance offerings were a evaluation and take on what FTC was saying, right? Because whatever they say, you have to adapt it for your industry. FTC made very broad, things that you had to do. But ultimately, what we saw were some products from some providers, and this all varied. But the main thrust of what these compliance software packages were is this kind of do-it-yourself compliance, right? So it's checklists that you have to go through. Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you have, XDR software? Do you, right? And going down this list, have you performed patching? Maybe plugging in a box, running a patch scan. Well, ultimately, go back to all the things I just talked about, right? Like, compliance is not about checklists. Compliance is about verification. Who has multi-factor? What things is multi-factor protecting? Are all of the accounts on multi-factor? When are the passwords changing? Have all the passwords changed, right? So saying you have the things versus saying the things are actually operating as they should and verifying all the components, that's the difference between checklists and compliance, right? If you're left to go through these checklists and answer these questions, you are in no way protected, right? And so what we're seeing ultimately is, again, when this false sense of security, dealers are going through the checklists, they're clicking a button, they're getting their annual report that the FTC says you need to have, but it's based on what? Self-reported checklists, right? It's not based on anything that's been verified. So it's a huge challenge, right? And so true compliance is about breach prevention. It's not about having some paperwork that you can hand to a regulatory agency, right? When you have a security incident and the insurance providers come in and want to deny your claim, and the litigants come in with their class action lawsuits, everyone's going to say and want to understand, were you actually doing best practices to protect consumer data? And if you say, here's my checklist of all the stuff we're done, they're going to be like, okay, great. Show me, prove it. I want to see exactly what those activities were. You did a pen test, great. Show me the things you remediated. What were the action items, right? So that's where we're seeing compliance software lacking, in that it's not analyzing or actioning the things that actually need to be corrected that are not compliant. Let's move on to the next one. So the other challenge is, and this is a challenge with a lot of things in the world, is that there is a cybersecurity expertise drought. And this has existed since cybersecurity has been a thing, right? Typically, there are 2 jobs for every 1 cybersecurity expert. We've seen dealers try to hire their own in-house staff. Very difficult to retain folks, right? Because there's such a huge, job market for cybersecurity experts. So what's happening is that the cybersecurity planning, response, right? All of that is thrown on the IT folks, right? That are operational people that don't have cybersecurity training and don't have the knowledge to deal with these highly sophisticated cyber criminals. And, human nature is such that it is very difficult for a person to raise their hand and say, I know you think I should be able to do this, and I know you think I'm an expert, but I don't want to tell you that I'm not qualified to do this thing you're asking me to do, even though to you it all sounds like cybersecurity, right? So it's a huge challenge. Move on to the next one. So now that I've doom and gloomed you and everything's terrible and it's hopeless and you might as well pack it all in, right? What are some questions that you can ask that are very practical questions in your organization? So, really big one, really simple one. Have we upgraded all of our computers to Windows 11? Okay. Windows 10 goes end of life next month. The biggest attacks come through phishing, get people to click on stuff, and then they gain access to their computer, and that's where their foothold is, and then they take it from there. You cannot be on Windows 11 after October. It's not next month, sorry, I'm already in September. So in end of October, Windows 11 goes end of life. Are all of your computers, sorry, Windows 10 goes end of life, you need to be on Windows 11 by end of October. The question is every computer on Windows 11? The way you get at that answer is show me the report of all of our computers and what operating system they have, right? The question isn't, are we on Windows 11 everywhere? It's show me the report. Have we appropriately deployed multi-factor authentication? The question is, show me the report of all of our users on the system and that they are active on the multi-factor authentication system, right? Not just do we have it, is everyone on it? If we're attacked, who will save us and how? Right? So the question there is that if you have a cyber attack on your system, do you have the expertise either in-house or external right now? And do you have a plan around what will happen, right? So again, a lot of this compliance stuff, people check boxes and generated these automatic, here's your incident response plan. Well, the incident response plan can be as simple as, hey, we're going to call this one number for this company or this person, and they're going to get in and they're going to help us with the system, right? If we have an incident, assuming it's detected. So what is the plan there? What's the process for applying security patches, right? So how are we actually doing that? And show me a report. The simple answer is you should see a report that shows 90% of your computers and devices on your system patched. Do we have outdated or unsupported technology on our network? Again, simple question. You should be able to run a report and see a report that shows you all of the devices on your network and either when they were installed or when they end of life, right? So network infrastructure will typically have an end of life, right? A Cisco Meraki device, Cisco says, hey, the end of life is XYZ date, right? And it could be 5 years in the future. It might not have one yet, which then it's even more than 5 years. You should be able to see a report. Same thing with PCs. You should be able to very easily see a report of when those PCs were built. And it should be 5 years from then. That's a typical rule of thumb. If you say a PC after 5 years, it should be replaced. So everything I'm showing you here, right? All 5 of these things, you should be able to see a report that you can inspect and that will tell you what you have. If you can't see a report on this information, be concerned. Figure out how to get that report, right? Whether you're an IT manager, make sure you have the technology to generate the report. If you're C-level, make sure you're able to ask for these reports and see them. This is the information that you need to be reviewing. Next slide. What are some other things that you can leverage that are more cutting edge, right? So those things are fundamentals. Now we get into some more cutting edge, right? This wouldn't be a good presentation if I didn't mention AI. Everybody's talking about AI, but where does AI work in dealerships? Well, the big thing is, if you go back to the very beginning of what I was talking about, and things like Sentinel-1, threat hunting. Historically, when you look at threat hunting, you had people, so you're always going to have people that are hooked into the computer systems and are trying to correlate behaviors that are happening, right? So an example would be an administrator logs in. Well, that throws a flag, right? Or an administrator logs into a couple places at the same time. That throws an even bigger flag. Well, what AI now is doing with threat hunting is it is much smarter about correlation. So, because AI is really good at that. So, for example, you sign into Microsoft 365 from two different locations, right? New York and LA. Impossible. You can't do that. Well, what AI can do then is look at that and then look a step further and say, oh, the IP address that you logged in from in LA was actually via a known VPN IP address. So already the true location is being obfuscated, right? So they're probably the cyber criminal. And then what that will do is put that in front of a person, and this is the most important part, right? So once that threat is identified, a person looks at that, and the newer technologies will then again leverage AI to give those threat hunters insight into, has anything been infiltrated in the network, right? So now I know who signed in, what computer they're on, what they're attached to, and AI can very quickly hunt through everything that is interconnected to see if anything was exploited with that attack. So that really has to do with leveraging the latest security technologies and surety expertise. Zero trust network security, I'll just touch briefly on these next two, is the notion of not allowing anything on the Wi-Fi or the wired network unless it's known, right? So we typically recommend this in larger organizations. So you get into the 500 computers or more organizations, and that becomes very important because you can't keep your arms around things. And there is a certain degree with these types of things where you can spend endlessly on security. Is it reasonable, right? But you get into larger computer networks, and putting a zero trust system in place that says, hey, if you're not authenticated, if you're not joined to the network, if you're not a valid user, if you're not running the XDR software that allows us to monitor, we're not going to let you on the corporate network. We're going to throw you in the guest network, right? If you have a password, but you're not any of these things, we're still going to throw you in the guest network. So that's called zero trust network security. Very important in larger organizations. Least privilege management system, if going back to where I was mentioning all these admin accounts, well, one of the big drivers for admin accounts in dealerships is installing software, right? So people need to install software, need to update software. And a lot of the software, especially the OEM stuff in the dealership world, is kind of clunky and still requires administrative access, tech tools in particular. So least privilege management systems allow you to lock down administrator, so nothing has administrator. And when somebody needs to install software update, there are rules in place that will allow that software to run with that administrative privilege if it's a known software. And if it's unknown, then the IT folks, right, or outsourced IT is able to evaluate if that's something that should be installed. So it speeds up installation of software and allows people to run without admin. And then obviously, right, these things need to be implemented and managed by folks that know how they're doing these things. Next slide. So some more questions to ask, right? FTC requires that you have a qualified individual. What are the qualifications of your qualified individual? Frequently, we're seeing this kind of getting dumped off on, somebody that has extra time, which there's nobody like that in the dealership. So we're finding that the qualified individual is typically not qualified in cybersecurity. Do you have any expertise in-house? What happens if they leave tomorrow, right? Do you have any backstop for that? And again, like I mentioned before, and I'm not going to belabor it, if you're attacked, what do you do? Who's going to save you? And that is my last slide. And with that, I will stop talking for 2 seconds and drink some more water and answer any questions or any input Greg has.
Alysha, did
Thank
you
you,
want
Erik.
to chime in here?
I mean, I have a question, but are you, do you have a presentation, Greg? If so, I'll let
Not a
you.
presentation. I have more. I'm here as the voice in the room from Rosenfield. I think, Erik, thank you. I mean, you have dumped a lot of information on the people watching this, and I can only imagine they feel like they're drinking from a fire hose right now. That is my experience. I've been doing this a long time. What I would encourage everybody on this call to do, and Erik and I talked about this, is to be curious about what your security infrastructure looks like. You need to start asking questions. You need to start, and the best place to start is at square one. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and have all of, 20 slides, Erik? All of his 20 slides implemented. I'm here to tell you, I've been with Rosenfield for years. We have undergone this process, and we started last August in tightening up our network. It's taken a year, and we feel a lot better about our network than where we were last year. And as Erik went through things, I'm like, yeah, we found that. Yeah, we found that. Yeah, we found that. So we went through a process. Just by example, in December, we upgraded all the computers so that we were in compliance for Windows 11 to get rid of outdated technology. I think there's a lot of questions that can come here. I think the important thing for me, what I take away from this, is you are not going to deploy a single person in your dealership, whether it's a single point store or multi-point store, that's going to be able to handle all this. Technology is moving way too fast. We all see it with AI and chat. You need to have a team, and that's where Erik's company comes in. And his company, by evidence of, what was it, Erik, 38,000 devices you're protecting, they have street cred. There's no doubt about it. You can find multiple companies, no offense, Erik, to go look. You have to be comfortable. I would encourage, if you hire Erik to do the job, that after things get tightened up, you then take the accounting approach and then audit what that company is saying they're doing. So you're constantly testing and reevaluating that you are up to date. But no one person is going to stay up to this. You need the company that's dedicated to it. So as I watch the slide, the one thing I would chime in on, as you open up your wiring closet and you find all the outdated hardware, or this old server that's running 2008, make sure you also have an appropriate destruction plan in place for your computers. You're not tossing them into the dumpster because the information is on the hard drive. You shouldn't do it with your work computers. You shouldn't do it with your personal computers. You shouldn't do it with your iPhone, right? This stuff lives on. And I know one area years ago when I achieved another company I was working at, we went for SOC 2, the infamous question were the copy machines, because copies make images, and then people would dispatch copy machines, and you have to make sure your copying machines are destroyed properly because they invariably have personal data on them. It's never ending tentacles that go further and further out. So I hope, if anything, people watching this have become more curious about what is going on in their dealership. And when I do things, it's always the top three, start with the top three things you can ask, from I think Erik's point in watching this, do you have Windows 11? Are you ready for Windows 11? I think Erik, it's probably safe to say, it's kind of, it was like a scare for me. It's like at the end of October, your Windows 10 PCs aren't going to stop working. They will continue to work. They are just going to become vulnerable. So don't let that lull you into a soft sense of security. Are you patched? Those two questions there will make you better a month from now if you can get those reports. And then, are you testing what you believe? Just don't listen to the person. Are you challenging them? Are you validating what they're telling you with an independent company? So with that, I'll leave it up to you.
So anybody have any questions come in, Kathy?
No, we've got a shy audience today, but we do have a few more minutes if you have any questions, Alysha.
I have a question, and maybe that will jumpstart everyone else's curiosity. I really like it that, Greg, that you pointed out what we discussed in our sort of strategy call for this webinar, and that is be curious, right? I mean, you don't know what you don't know. So I think that's probably the best start. But the word patching came up again and again, Erik, and I guess that's when you get a notification that there's an update available, you just say, yes, update. But as you noted, and as we all know, sometimes when you update, it messes, and that's not the word I was thinking, but that's the word I'm using. It messes things up on your computer, and it doesn't work the way it used to. So do you have a suggestion of a patching process that do it overnight, have someone check it all in the morning? I mean, what's your suggestion for a patching process where people aren't going to log in and not be able to use their computers? Does such a process exist?
Yes. So the notion of, when I talk about patching, right, what folks are typically used to, which is what you're describing. Hey, this patch comes in. Do you say yes, or you let it happen automatically? That covers part of it. But what a real patching process is it uses technology on the back end. So we have a team that manages patches, and they have full visibility into all of the systems, right? The computers, the network infrastructure, the printers, you name it. And they can see the current patch status of everything. And then they see, I'm oversimplifying, right? A list of all the available patches and kind of categorizations. These are critical, these are whatever. And then they can look and research and assess and release patches as they're known to not interfere with other things, and do it in small batches, right? So across all of our clients, right, 30,000 computers, we don't just say boom and we let a patch go to 30,000 computers. We do it in small chunks. We can see what's happening with certain ones, the critical ones we speed up, and then you roll it out over time. So it's a strategy that involves some pretty sophisticated technology. And that's what you need to have happening on the back end. One thing I did want to add too, because I know we are running short on time, one of the things that we do, and I don't want to sound like a shameless sales pitch, but I do want to at least make sure everyone understands. Part of where we get all this data is we assess what dealers have on their systems, and that's something we do kind of out in the industry and out in the world, and we do that on our nickel. So that's something too for all of Rosenfield clients. That's something we can help with if they want to get an assessment, and we do that free of charge of roughly where they are.
So any other questions? Because I have one more in that case. And this is also perhaps shamelessly promotional, but hey, I work for Rosenfield and Co, or with them. So why does an accounting firm care about cybersecurity? Like, why should they care about cybersecurity?
I mean, who's that for? Is that for me or for Greg?
That's for you, Erik.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think I know, speaking for myself, right? When I look at my CPAs, I mean, they're trusted business advisors. So, and I think we all look to CPAs as experts, and part of the expertise is in risk. So that's one, right? So generally, I think of my CPA as a really smart guy, and I know Ken, and he's a really smart guy. So, right, smart people should have answers to everything. I certainly feel like I have answers to everything. So, but I think also historically, IT has rolled up to the CFO, right? So, I mean, it's kind of one of those, who's going to be responsible for this? Who's going to take ownership of IT? So what we find is in almost all cases, IT either rolls up to a CIO, but in dealerships, almost always rolls up to the CFO. And that's where I think the role of CPAs come in, as far as advising them.
Do we have time for Greg to add his 2 cents, Kathy? If he has any 2 cents to add?
I think Erik again said it. I mean, the CPA is your trusted business advisor. I don't know of any company or any person or firm that you are going to engage that has more knowledge about you personally and professionally. Your doctor doesn't know what your CPA knows and have access to the information that they have access to. So it is in their best interest to keep your overall health, not just your accounting health, every health and your entire business running and doing everything possible to keep that. And that's why we're doing this. We think this is a valuable service. We're not professing to be the experts here. We've partnered with multiple companies that are the experts and have the training and continually upgrade their skills. We know where to look. And we know how to help people find those services. And we're here to help you and direct you and evaluate this kind of stuff if you need it.
Perfect timing. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Erik.
Perfect. Thank
Over
you
to
so
you,
much.
Kathy.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. And a special thank you to Erik and Greg. This was really eye-opening. I have to say, like Greg mentioned, we have been going through this sort of like security process at the firm, and learning a little bit about the backside helps me understand, because Greg, I gave you pushback on upgrading my laptop this year. I did not want to do it. So I totally understand now, like why these things are important. So I hope that you guys all got that insight as well. And if you'd like to continue the conversation or learn more about how we can help, please connect with us. We'll be sharing a recording of today's session and the slides as well, so keep an eye out for that. And on behalf of all of us, thank you so much again for spending the last hour with us. We look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. You guys all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.